Hello. Hello and welcome to the podcast. It's the Michael Harding podcast, and I'm operating now from a little room in Donegal. And there was two things I wanted to do this week. I'm still in the kind of energy of Easter. And for me, Easter has to be those two moments. One is the story of crucifixion, the story of death and crucifixion, and the other is resurrection. So there's a sorrow and there's shadow, and then there's joy and there's light. And I thought I'd like to do something just one more time about this. And coincidentally, I was asked to do something during the week, last week, which was really important to me. I don't think I realised how important it was until I did it. But I got a call from Catherine Corliss, who is the woman, the historian, who uncovered the whole scandal in Tuam about the baby's home, the mother and baby home, and the suspected illegal burial of hundreds of little babies. And it's something that I don't like to talk about, and it's something that I don't like to listen to, and I find it difficult. It brings up all sorts of emotions in me. Some of the emotion is like the feeling that, well, you know, there's unpleasant things in the past and we want to get rid of them. We want to forget about them. So that was one way of thinking about Tuam, you know. And she rang me, she left a message on my machine, and I thought, oh God, now do I have to do this, you know, because she's looking for something. I didn't know what she was looking for, but anyway, I phoned her back last Saturday, and she said that there was a guy called John McGurk, and he is a survivor of abuse from Scotland, Dumfries. He was incarcerated as a child, and he survived that, and he lives out in Osnabrück in Germany, and he'd organised a group of cyclists to cycle the entire way from Osnabrück right through Europe, across the Channel, up to Scotland, across to Belfast, and then from Belfast down to Armagh to Tuam. And they stopped at various places along the way where there were people, you know, sites that are connected with abuse. And the final moment was to come to Tuam and to lay a wreath, or to bring hundreds of little crosses to represent the children. And this was kind of like a ritual, a pilgrimage, a prayer, very beautiful thing to do, and raised money on the way, tens of thousands of euros. She wanted me, she said, would you come over and say a few words like to welcome them? And I thought, yeah, sure, I'll do that, that'll be grand. But I also felt this is tricky because there's more to welcoming them than welcoming them. Because what makes it charged is that it's Tuam. What makes it electric is that this is the site. It's a playground in the middle of a housing estate on the Dublin Road, and it's charged with the sense that there are hundreds of bodies, dead children underneath your feet that were left there illegally. And there's something about me and you that you don't want to get involved. You don't want to have to make a stand. You can be watching it on the television and thinking that's awful, but in a sense you don't want to make a stand yourself. That's what I find. But anyway, I said, of course, I'd go, because when somebody of that moral stature asks you to do something, you actually don't have a choice. If you're in any way a moral person and you are called on to do something for the greater good, you really don't have a choice. The imperative of being a moral person overrides, and you say, I better do it. So off I went to Tuam, and I was coming from Donegal, so it was going to be a long way. So what I did was I drove down the night before, and I stopped in the Clare Galway, nice hotel, got for cheap enough, a modest, comfortable room, and then I prepared my little speech, wrote it out and redrafted it. And then the following morning I went over to Tuam and I was there. And the first thing that really shocked me was it was like, these are Germans coming, right? And I was thinking like 10 o'clock, so we'll be gathering at 10 o'clock and we'll get going at 11 o'clock. No. They were all there. The boys had come on their bicycles and those vans with them, supporting them. And they were all there. On the dot of 10, they came in to the little car park, ready to go. And I had to move quick because I was just arriving at 10, but as I say, I thought I'd have a chance to chat people and relax myself first. Anyway, we all went over to the little corner where there's a little shrine, if you like, a little altar they've made to the Mother of God, and people use that as the focus. And they put little mementos down there, like little children's toys and children's shoes and so forth. And it's very moving. It's very moving to be there. It's very moving to be present in such a place. You're talking hundreds of bodies beneath the ground, allegedly put there illegally. All these bodies, all these human beings are recorded as having died. There are death certificates for the whole lot of them. But there is no record of a burial. So if they're not in the ground beneath our feet, God, there's a bigger issue where some of them actually sent off on secret adoptions to America and then a fake death certificate issued. There's a lot of questions still to be answered about the Tuam babies. Or somewhere around here. Who knows? But the entire building, which would have been a huge building, and all the walls around it, was all vanished. Erased. I find that in itself extraordinary. And then you link that to the fact that the records were kind of erased, because whenever anybody went looking for records of this place about, what went on in it, the nuns, the order involved, the Bon Secours sisters, just said, well, we don't have any records, we left all that with the local authorities and with the health board, And then the local authority and the health board said, no, we don't have any records of that. That must be with the nuns. Now, I was over there before. I went over there the time that Pope Francis was coming to Ireland. It's about, I'd say, now I haven't researched this, it's 3 years ago or so. And he was coming to Ireland. He was going to be in the Phoenix Park on the Sunday. And the people who were campaigning about the Tuam babies, that they should be recognised and the place should be dug up, and archivists and archaeologists should come in and do a DNA test on all the bones and find out everything about them. That all was going on, and the Pope was coming, and you'd expect the Pope to say something about it. And Catherine Corless got an invitation from the government to be at a reception to welcome the Pope. And she thought, well, that's a great privilege. But then she checked and she thought to herself, I'm in the room with the Pope and maybe 100 other people. Can I get talking to the Pope? And she rang back and asked them that, and they said, no, you can't. And she said, well, then that's fair enough, so I don't want to be at it. She didn't go. And so it was decided that instead they would have a gathering and a little prayer service for the dead babies in Tuam, in the playground, in the area where they're supposed to be buried. And they would have that at the same time as the Pope was saying his Mass in the afternoon, 3 o'clock that day. It was a Sunday. And I felt that it properly expressed my faith to be with Catherine Corliss. And it was there, and it was no big deal, and I found it very moving. And all the names, the name of every child was called out to give them a sense of their presence, and that was moving. And I remember there was a mental health gig, or how would you call it, a mental health event in a hotel in Carrick-on-Shannon. About 6 months later, and there was about 1,000 people in the audience, and it was full of entertainers and singers and people doing recitations and comedians and people dancing and whatever. And it was all about mental health. And Catherine Corliss was there again, and again I gave it a mention. I spoke about how I felt personally there was a real need to do funerals well and properly, and that grieving was something that had to be done properly by a community in public, and I felt that that wasn't happening. And so for all the survivors, children who had been in that home in Tuam, who are now men and women in their 60s and 70s, but who are still deeply damaged by the savage experience they had, particularly of losing their mother or feeling that their mother had abandoned them. And remember that what was happening was the young girl would go in to have a baby, and the whole thing was agreed. You come in, you have the baby, and you stay for a year minding the baby and working hard in the home for no money, but just like that's the way you pay your way or pay for your sin or whatever you want to say about it. And when that's over, you go. You don't go with your baby, you go. And the stories of people saying, men who are my age now saying that they remember as children that the screams and roars and the unbearable pain of the young girls when they would be parted from their child after a year and put out. And there's one young lad who's now, as I say, my age again, and he talks about his mother used to come to the home once a week for about 2 or 3 years. She stayed and found herself a job in Tuam, and every week she'd come knocking on the door to try and see the child, and the child was inside and did not know that. And she was never allowed to see the child, and eventually she went off to England. And years later he went to England and he found her, and he found out the truth from her. The broken-hearted pain and suffering of those mothers who were parted from their children. The broken-hearted pain of those children who were taken from their mothers and left in this institution of severe Victorian standards. It's incredible. Absolutely incredible. And so I'd be on to Catherine Corliss and it'd be like, yeah, I'll be there. No problem, Catherine. Thank you. So off I went to Tuam to do me piece. And I got there, as I say, and it was like, it was ready to go the minute I got there. It was kind of really scary and shocking. But I said a piece. I had it printed out. One of the things that frightened me as well was who turned up but the Bishop of Tuam, the Archbishop of Tuam. And I had a few lines in it that'd be severe on the church. And there was the Archbishop, and I thought, Jesus, Mary and St. Joseph, how am I going to say all this? And what was even more difficult was, I know the Archbishop of Tuam, lovely man, Francis Duffy, from Cavan, born boy. And in fact, he'd be about 5 years younger than me, and he studied in Maynooth. When I was in Maynooth, he was a younger student. And we were both ordained for the same diocese, Cavan, so there we were. Brother priests, him an archbishop, me a renegade outside the church. The two of us meeting in a graveyard in Tuam to talk about dead babies. So it was a kind of a surreal experience, and at the same time it turned out to be deeply moving. For me, it was the Good Friday. for me, meditating on child abuse, the suffering that came from the way that the church in Ireland treated women, is like Golgotha. It's like a crucifixion. And I think it's worth dwelling on. There's some way, when you look into the darkness, you can see more clearly. There's an image in Catherine Corliss's beautiful book of a little shoe, a little blue shoe, in that place where the bodies are. A baby's shoe is a small thing. A baby's shoe that someone placed with the body before it was disposed of is a terrible thing. Disposed in the dictionary means to get rid of by throwing away, or selling, or giving to someone else. But I'm speaking of a real infant with a little blue shoe in the hole in the ground that was beside us. A little body that someone hugged and loved. But a body over which no one ever said a funeral mass. Over which no one spread incense, or prayed the words of the last farewell, "May the angels lead you to paradise." No, there was no little white coffin ever to be trolleyed out of a church for this little baby, because there was no church, no ritual, no ceremony. There was no decade of the rosary ever said over that child's grave. And that child, a particular child with a little blue shoe, still lies in the ground, in a hole in the ground, in Tuam. The soul of that child is with God. And if there is a God, then he is in that place. He is there in Tuam, and he is angry. Christians, Jews, Muslims, all children of the holy books, all acknowledge that it is in a child that God manifests to the world. But the bishops in their palaces and the nuns in their parlours who manage the church have unfinished business here. They have unfinished business with God. They need to come here to this place and raise these little bodies from the earth and acknowledge in them the face of the infant Christ. And they need to do their duty and say their prayers and give these souls the proper and dignified burial that is their due. This needs to be done. It is the duty of those who manage the church to do it, and to do it without delay. The great ship that we call the Christian Church used these children as slaves, and when they were finished with them, they disposed of them as slaves. Nothing could fly in the face of God's love more than what was done here. The God that is born as a human child. The sacred dimension that makes every human life blessed. Yet they disposed of these dead into a hole without blessing or farewell. They colluded with the state, hiding records of their dark deeds, blocking the survivors' access to the intimate stories of their loved ones' lives, and erasing their identities. Now, we do funerals well in Ireland. So as long as these bodies remain here, disposed of without dignity or ritual, in secret and with intentional collusion to erase their memory, the Irish people will not allow any government off the hook. Though the survivors grow old and tired and weary, they will prevail. Because they know that the shame is not theirs. The shame is for the church to carry and for the state to carry. Please bury these bodies so the shame that the survivors have been burdened with for decades can be lifted. The shame that the church and state burdened them with, calling them bastards, calling their mothers mother of a bastard. It's so unspeakable that it's difficult to find a way out of this crime scene. But let me begin with myself. To the survivors here today, I say this: forgive me. I beg your forgiveness. Like tens of thousands of others, I have sat in an armchair and watched the Tune Babies saga play out on television. But then I forget, as if it had nothing to do with me. The fact is, it has everything to do with me, and with every Irish citizen. This is a wound on our nation. This happened in my name. This is for me and everyone in Ireland to own and accept as our shame, and to ask forgiveness for the pain that a previous generation of clergy and politicians and people inflicted on these children. I'm a Christian, and my faith means an enormous amount to me. My faith is a life raft. It heals me. It carries me through the darkness. And I am so ashamed of what was done to these survivors in my name and to these dead children in my name. Because these children were trembling with the light of God's divine love. The disposal of their bodies unrecorded, secretly and without proper rituals and in unmarked, disused sewerage systems was a blasphemy. It was an offence against God, committed by the very institutions that would claim to uphold the love of that God. It was like Golgotha. And so when these bodies, these little children's bodies, are raised up again from the earth and buried properly, then and only then will we be able to move forward and find renewal and hope and joy. They sleep in the arms of their God, in the arms of their mother, and we remember them when we recite the words, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are these children." Thank you for being here. Bye-bye.